Now, one family member can cause problems for the entire family by simply holding bitterness, that root of bitterness. You holding that root of bitterness can affect your children. It can affect your parents. It can affect your livelihood. You go to work and you can't get your mind on what you need to do. You're so busy thinking about what somebody has done to you. You can't even function in life. It can affect everyone. Let it go. Let it go. Give up resentment. And then letter C, write this down. We talked about dispensing forgiveness, giving up resentment. Release the offender. Release them. You say, but Pastor, come on, they don't deserve to be released. I want them in bondage. I want them held by what they have done. That's what they deserve. Let it go. They don't have to deserve to be released. Sometimes they're silly things, silly offenses. Offenses that we have for someone, like I talked about earlier, that they don't even know what the problem is. They don't even know what's going on. You know, I was thinking about, and let me just preface this by saying this is not happening in our church, but the last month or so we've been teaching a membership class. By the way, we got a great big membership class. Lots of new members. God is growing our church. Awesome things are happening. But one of my favorite things to do is to stand at the door and to shake your hand and to find out what's going on in your day and your week and going on in your life before you come into worship or come into Sunday school. That's one of my favorite things to do. I love to stand out there. Even as an evangelist, I'd stand at the door and just shake hands. You'd think I was running for political office or something. I just like getting to know people. And but when we have a membership class, I don't get to do that the whole time. When we have a membership class, I got to get back to the classroom and be there with the students of that class. And what a great class we've got. But I'm not able to be at the door during the times we have a membership class going. Now, this isn't happening. I'm just telling you. But somebody could say, you know, that Pastor Steve, he used to shake my hand. He used to be at the door every time. But he just doesn't care about me anymore. He just doesn't give a rip about us anymore. He won't even come to the door anymore. And I'm offended. And frankly, he should ask for my forgiveness. Because he has really upset me. Now, that's silly. That's a silly offense. But it could be real. I hope you're not feeling that way. Nobody's shared that with me, so I don't know. But you may not know what's going on. You may not know what's happening, but you could have that as an offense. You know, Carrie's been working back in the nursery, and we're trying to build up new nursery workers and get a good rotation going. And the nursery is one of the most important ministries of our church. Right now, little babies are being cared for, and diapers are being changed, and they're getting loved on and hugged and rocked. You realize our rocking chairs back here come from Cracker Barrel? We have Cracker Barrel rocking chairs. I mean, our babies get the best care possible. But we don't have enough nursery workers. We got lots of babies. I mean, there's times when we got babies coming out of our ears back there. Just right beyond that wall right there. Just wonderful. And you know, we've got all kinds of electronic devices to let moms know that, you know, we need them to come back and check on their baby. Just like when you go to a restaurant, you know, gives you a little vibrator device that lights up. We do that, so if you see a mom get up in the middle of service, you know, it's not because they don't like Pastor Steve's preaching. They just got called back here to the nursery. We can call them back electronically. But, you know, Carrie has been working with training up new nursery workers, and we still need a lot more. We still need a lot more people to serve in that area. But she doesn't get back to service until service has already gotten underway. So, that pastor's wife, can you believe it? She doesn't even get into service until halfway through the worship. I'm offended by that. Silly. Nobody has done that. I'm just telling you that has not happened. But it could. I'm just saying it could. It could happen. Because you don't know what's happening. And the same thing could happen with anyone in our church family. It could happen with anyone in your own family. Silly things, silly offenses. And we let them become something that they're not, and we get offended, and then we let them build. Okay? What I'm talking about is you take the one offense, and then you're already mad over something that's silly. And then you're starting to look for things to be mad about. Well, they've upset me about that. There must be something else. But sure enough, they'll do something. Somebody will do something. Somebody will, and then you add that offense. And then now you've got two. And I mean, you are just ticked off over silliness. And then you add another offense. And then you add another. And before long, you just explode over silliness. Release the offender. Go to them and say, hey, did you know that, I was offended, Pastor, you didn't shake my hand this Sunday. I can say, oh, man, I wanted to. Your hand is my favorite one to shake. You got the firmest grip in our church. But I was back teaching a membership class. Boom, evaporates. No offense. There's no reason to be offended. John 20, verse 23, Jesus says, if you forgive anyone's sins, they are forgiven. Get this, though. If you don't forgive them, they are not forgiven. You say, wow, Pastor, that's pretty profound. They're not forgiven. Let it go. Let the offender be released. Give them freedom. Henry Ward Beecher said this. He said, when people say, I can forgive, but I cannot forget. You ever heard that? Don't respond to this, but have you ever said that? I can forgive, but I can't forget. He said, this is only one way of saying, I cannot forgive. What do? Well, you contact that person. You get in touch with them. And most importantly, you can pray. Because there may be things you don't understand. There may be aspects of what you perceive that your perception is not accurate. Pray. Pray that God will help you with the situation. And then letter D, write this down. Mend what you can. Mend what you can. And let me say, as we get into this aspect, that not all relationships can be mended. You say, well, isn't the power of God big enough to mend every relationship? Yes, it is. But guess what? God is sovereign, and in God's sovereignty, He has given every one of us the freedom of choice. Okay? God, in His power, could mend every relationship, but He chooses not to because He wants you and I to have the freedom to choose. We have the freedom of choice. From Adam and Eve on down to you and I today, we all have the freedom to choose, the freedom of choice. And so if God gives us the freedom of choice, we should give the offender the freedom to choose whether or not to mend the situation. So you can do what you can from your side, but the other person may or may not do what they need to do from their side. But when you do what you can do from your side of the problem, you can be set free. The bondage, the weight of unforgiveness can be lifted from your shoulders, and you can walk in freedom even if they choose to walk in bondage. You can be set free. So let me give you a scriptural example of what I'm talking about. Now, in the early church, there are a number of factions and problems that took place. Some of them mended themselves, like Paul and Barnabas with John Mark. And some of you know that story. That mended itself. But let me give you an example of something that didn't completely mend. Peter was the leader of the Jerusalem church. Peter was the core center of the church in Jerusalem and the church to the Jewish people. And there was a big battle that took place between Peter and Paul. Paul, as you know, was not one of the 12 apostles. Initially, he was a persecutor of Christians. He would go out to kill Christians. He would go out to bring them in bonds back to Jerusalem. And he was hated by Christians, had that experience on the road to Damascus. He experiences the voice of Jesus Christ speaking to him and saying, Saul, why do you persecute me? His name is changed to Paul. He becomes a believer. He shows up at church. Let me tell you, he was not well accepted. When he showed up in the Jerusalem church, they said, uh-oh, that's the enemy. That's the guy who killed that's the guy who killed my mother, killed my father, killed my brother. That's the person that I've got family members in jail in Jerusalem right now because of that man. They hated him. And he goes to Peter and he says, guess what? God has spoken to me, and I am going to take the message of the gospel to the Gentile world. Now, the early church at that time, they believed that if you were to become a Christian, you had to first become a Jew. You had to first follow all the Jewish ordinances and practices and all of their feasts and all of the things that Jews were required to do and not do. You had to do it that way, and then you could become a Christian. And Peter was adamant that that's how it should be. They were the people of the church that said, this is the way we've always done it. This is the way we're going to do it. This is anointed of God. This is how it's always been. And this is how we're going to do it. Paul, you could take a long hike off a short pier. And that's how it was. And so Peter is praying about this thing. He knows there's this faction in the church and there's this division in the church over whether or not there should be circumcision, whether or not they should eat food offered to idols, whether or not they should require the new believers from the Gentile world to do all the Jewish practices and all the rituals. And there was this faction going on. And all of a sudden, Peter, while he's on the rooftop of a house, all of a sudden, while he's praying, he has a vision. And in this vision, a sheet comes down, being held by four corners, and it comes down in front of him. And on this sheet is all the things that Jews are not supposed to touch, not supposed to eat. I mean, there's a great big honey-baked ham. I mean, there's a whole plate of bacon. There's lobsters, and there's even some buzzards that have been carved up and made like a Christmas turkey. All these scavengers and these cloven-hoofed animals and all of these things, and it's well prepared, but it's laying out in front of him, and the voice of God says, eat. Peter says, I don't think so. I'm a Jew. I don't touch that kind of thing. I don't go anywhere near that kind of thing. That is absolutely off limits. Everything the Old Testament law says, I shouldn't touch any of that. I shouldn't go anywhere near any of that. And the voice says, eat. Well, that kind of messed Peter up. God was telling him, I am taking the message of the gospel to the Gentile world, and I am not requiring them to become Jews in order to become Christians. Well, needless to say, Peter continued to work with the Jewish people. That became his ministry. Paul went off and took the message of the gospel all around the known world, getting on ships and traveling by land and sea to all of the major cities and bringing the message of the gospel. From there, it would be spread to the ends of the earth, and it would eventually, 2,000 years later, come to you. You see, if it had only been exclusively held to the Jews, you and I would not have the gospel today. Now, nowhere in Scripture does it say that Peter and Paul became best buddies. They became best friends. There was a faction there that never completely mended. But God worked through it anyway. And there are situations, circumstances that you may have where the other person won't give in, won't give up, and you can't mend it. And it's okay. You do what you can from your side.